Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Drive Paper Out of Your Processes, 4 Tips to Digitize and Automate Document-Intensive Workflows. I'm Teresa Resick, Director of Webinars here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are Richard Medina of DocuLabs and Pete Stein of Novitex. And Novitex is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. And before we get started, I just want to offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar. You can download a PDF of the presentation at any time. Just look to the bottom of your screen in the Resources tab, and you'll see a link there to download the presentation. Feel free to ask questions throughout the hour using the Ask a Question feature. We will hold these questions until the end, where we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them, but you can also use this feature to comment or ask for technical assistance. At the end of the webinar, we would greatly appreciate it if you would take a brief survey, tell us how we did today, and to suggest future topics for us to cover. The link to that feedback survey is also in the Resources tab at the bottom of your screen, and I'll remind you again at the end of the hour about taking that survey. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Webinars on Demand library in just a few days. Right now, I just want to take a moment to introduce our featured speakers today. Pleased to have these two gentlemen with us. Pete Stein is the Solutions Vice President of Novitex Enterprise Solutions, and Pete is responsible for creating and developing capture and intelligent data solutions. He has transformed clients' workflows to reduce expenses and simplify and speed up their processes. And we also have with us today Richard Medina, and Rich is the co-founder and principal consultant of DocuLabs. And DocuLabs was founded on 3 simple principles: objective recommendations, analysis grounded by benchmark data, and a specialization in content-based applications. Labs has established itself as the premier consultancy in the enterprise content management market, engaged by most Fortune 100 over the 21 years of its history. So right now, I'm going to turn things over to Richard Medina to begin talking about driving the paper out of your processes. Rich?
Thank you very much, Teresa. So I'm going to be talking about 4 things, which you see up there on your screen, and there's still time to escape gracefully. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is when to digitize and automate. That is, when does it make good sense? And you can figure, when you think about when it makes good sense to automate and to digitize, you can think of 3 levels of processes. Number 1 are your capture processes. So whether it's in-house or you're using a BPO to do your capture, and it's how efficiently, effectively you can do the capture and recognition and so on. The second area is downstream from that, and that's document handling processes. So that's how effectively and efficiently folks in the business units can find documents, search for documents, copy documents, and so on, but whether they're doing a lot of document inefficient shadow functions. And the third area is the most interesting, at least to me, and that's the downstream business process efficiencies. And that's what your customers, whether they're internal or they're external, really care about. And so that's, is the process efficient? Are they saving money? Are they using their FTEs as efficiently as possible? Are they servicing loans, doing a high value in a short cycle time? Are they doing a high volume of loan processing or widget manufacturing or whatever? Those are really interesting. In practice, you should probably be adept at being able to justify, think about, plan, manage, justify your capture initiatives using, being able to adeptly use 1 or all 3 of those kinds of justifications. So then I'm going to talk about how to leverage the latest advances in upstream capture. So think about upstream and downstream. Upstream is when you get documents and you capture them, turn them from paper to electronic, do various things on them, and then throw them over the fence downstream into the business processes, the line of business processes, or the shared services like accounting or HR or whatever. And the latest advances I'm talking about have been being able to do remote, distributed, multi-channel capture and indexing that can efficiently feed into the capture center, and then you can do various data operations on them, clean up, QA, and so on, and then throw them downstream. The latest advances in downstream capture have been kind of pushing the boundaries of what the capture center can do. So rather than having the more expensive line of business processors who should be approving loans or approving insurance claims or approving invoices. Instead of having them do that stuff, which they were hired for, they're actually, processing documents and double keying in data fields and stuff like that. If you can push the boundaries of the capture center downstream and take on some of that work, it makes your customer very happy, lets them do the work they were probably hired for, but also improves the cycle time and so on, because you're getting errors, determining whether document sets are in good order or not in good order as quickly as possible, and thereby detecting and correcting any errors and so on, so that most of the stuff that goes downstream into their hands is in good order. And then finally, I'm going to talk about how you get these good results, these benefits, by how you should plan and manage your capture operation. Whether you do it in-house or you outsource it, whether you've got a small operation or a larger operation. There's a lot more than just what scanners you should buy and so on. A few more words about ourselves. Teresa mentioned this. We're DocuLabs. We've been around since 1993 or so. We've got 20 or more years of experience. We're not allied with any vendors or software providers. We don't do coding. We do none of that. We provide strategic advice about initiatives like capture operations, information governance, information management, and so on. We've had more than 1,200 engagements with more than 550 customers. We're pretty trainable, so we've learned an awful lot. And since 1995, we've been doing what we call capture benchmarks, where we evaluate capture operations, typically the larger ones, both for-profit and in-house. And that's where a lot of this information comes from that I'm going to be talking about. So the first topic is when to digitize and automate. And again, let's talk about when it makes sense. I briefly reviewed the three kinds of processes that you should be looking at and how you should be measuring them and so on. But let's look at some of the real cases. Don't worry about this guy in front of you. I'm going to talk about it in a few minutes. But first, here's some examples. One is a classic. It's digital file room. You got a back office full of documents or whatever. Maybe it's post-process. You scan them in. Oftentimes, it fails at return on investment at ROI because there's no doc handling. They're just dead documents except for intermittent reference or customer service dispute resolution or whatever. Typically, if you do the math, that kind of capture doesn't pan out. It's not worth it unless there's a risk-related driver, such as for regulatory requirements or for litigation discovery or for whatever, records management requirements. You have to scan that stuff in. The second type is digital office. That's where, same sort of thing as back office, back file room conversion, but you're actually, folks are actually accessing the documents, finding them, looking at them, and so on. And so you can increase the efficiency of these doc handling processes and save money, save time, and so on by doing the kind of scanning. The kind of process, again, as you might imagine, that I'm most interested in has to do with what you're looking at in front of you. Now, it has to do here. None of us can read it, but just look at the colors and the shapes. You see lots of pinks and lots of yellows. Pinks are manual processes. Yellows are digital but manual. Pink is manual processes. Yellow is paper and manual. And it's typical. It's one of the poster children for digitizing. It's new loan application processing where folks apply for, say, house loans or whatever, and it goes through the machine, and they get approved or not approved, and so on. It's a really good test case for what kind of benefits you can get by digitizing and automating. And as I said, all I was really concerned about was the blues and the yellows, and you can do the process of digitizing and automating turns a lot of those, let's say, blue makes them automatic, makes them digital, and so on. But again, that's a very interesting ROI business case. But what the executives in the business in, say, loan operations are primarily interested in is what it means to their metrics that they're concerned about. And that might be how long it takes to process a loan, how many FTEs do they need to do this sort of stuff, how many loans can they process per month, per year, what's customer satisfaction and customer retention like. So let's look at this. Here's an example of an executive dashboard for, say, new loan mortgage processing. And it shows how capture and workflow can yield ROI. It's a higher level model than the one that I just showed you. And at the top, it has a picture of a workflow. At the bottom, you can see the 4 tracks that are the performance indicators that the executives are most interested in. And in the middle, you see buttons for 3 of the technologies most often used to improve loan processing: capture, electronic forms, and workflow. For simplicity, I'm just going to focus on capture and workflow. So let's see, through AutoMagic, if we start doing capture and OCR, what kind of improvements we can get. So imaging by itself with OCR eliminates manual data entry at the beginning and improves cycle time, FTEs, and serviceable volume. You get good lift even though you're still manually routing the images around, manually still addressing, is this document set, is it in good order, not in good order, that sort of thing. Where workflow comes in is when you can kind of do case management and other types of process management to automate some of these processes, like determining whether it's in good order or not in good order and such. And you can see that if you do both imaging and workflow, you get even more significant effects. You can eliminate some steps in the beginning and also do some automated straight-through processing for a subset of the application. Yes, I know you can't see any of this, but look at the arrows in the circle. Each step also improves the flexibility of the process for outsourcing or globalization, say with Novitex. If you've got your well-defined processes and you know where you could get greater efficiencies by outsourcing them, you can throw it over your fence, have them address it, and then receive the work back and be on your merry way. So I ignored e-signatures, but this can give you dramatic improvements wherever you have wet signatures and thus need to be in the paper world for at least part of the workflow. I'm just going to talk about e-signatures for a moment. You want to eliminate the need to have a kind of hybrid process where you want to start electronically and stay that way. If you have to manage paper documents, this is costly, inefficient, and makes records management and auditing much harder. And the best place to start e-signatures, if you're wondering where to start, is at the end points of processes, at the beginning of the process and at the end. Because typically it's easier to address the end of the process first because all the documents are under your control. The beginning of the process is probably second easiest, but that can be difficult because you're getting all sorts of documents, say from my kids, from my wife, from my mom, and so on. So they're typically not in good order. They need some exception handling. Whereas if it's done through your process and so on, you'll be able to do, it's much easier to do straight-through processing with electronic signatures and such. Okay. So having declared victory on that, let's now talk about how to leverage the latest advances in upstream and downstream capture. And I'm going to take topic number 2 and topic number 3 together. So here's a mess. Most of you folks are probably doing some or even all of these. So the most significant trend in the last couple of years, last 3 years or so, has been moving advanced capture processing both up and downstream. So let's say upstream into the hands of your agents of your financial services or your actual end customers. So again, my family, my neighbors, and so on, and having them capture documents, upload trailing documents, and so on. And then, as I said, downstream, so being able to determine whether not just a document, but a packet of documents, let's say, is entirely complete and in good order, or whether there has to be some exception handling. You've got to throw it back to the original person who scanned it and say, do it again, or whatever. So what exactly are some of the challenges in this mare's nest that we're looking at? Well, I'd say, and see if you do a self-evaluation here, whether this fits your organization. There's no consistent enterprise standard process or input flow for documents. So you're using something for centralized capture. You may be using MSPs or desktop scanners out in the branches. They're using folks can use smartphones maybe to capture stuff. They're using fax and e-fax, and that's an entirely different vendor probably. You may have one or more portals which your organization lets folks upload documents, and that goes to mailbox folders or shared drives, or usually not a good enterprise content management system and such. So no consistent enterprise standard process. no easy method to upload electronic documents, no use of online fillable dynamic forms. E-signature capability is not integrated at the beginning or the end. And what we call indexing and vetting are completely manual. Again, that's that vetting. That's a term that's sometimes used. That's determining whether not just a document, but maybe a set of documents is all in good order, or whether you need to throw it back and do some exception handling, some research, and so on, or whether you can push it forward. And a high percentage of submissions, because not only is vetting completely manual, a high number of submissions are out of order, require manual exception processing by the downstream staff or your staff or whatever. And this kind of arrangement, you can see it's even hard to draw. It's very hard to scale and to maintain. The biggest lesson, perhaps, that I would say that we learned since 1995 in doing these benchmarks is that there's a qualitative difference between going from a small, simple capture operation to a big, complex one. So and this is across the board, whether it's for centralized capture or whether it's incorporating multifunction devices, as everyone started to do in 2003, or whether it's incorporating mobile devices, as folks started doing in 2011, 2012. And what they often think is that all you have to do is just scale up everything a little bit, whether it's quality or indexing or whatever, but that never works. You've got to make a qualitative leap and do things differently if you begin to scale up. And I'll be talking about some of these a little bit further down the presentation. So what does it look like if you fix it? Well, here's a tuned and sorted future state, and here I'm just focusing on the technology, but there's roughly 9 more things that you need to do other than technology to get a good operation running. But we'll get to that. But let's look at the technology. Roughly, you've got the upstream in the blue in good order, and you've got kind of the downstream in that pastel or whatever, the peach in good order. So let's talk about some of the key user capabilities that this tuned and sorted operation has. Folks, I say in the words you see there, it could be branch staff, field staff, customer. It could be anyone else, folks at kiosk, anyone in the field, if you're a telco, if you're a manufacturing operation, whatever. But any user can scan and upload paper documents, and also documents you can pass on docs they got in electronic format from their customers or third parties. Basically, the basic idea here, I'll just cut to the chase, is that any user can submit documents in any format via any mechanism into a centralized capture platform for consistent processing. And yes, they're all first-class citizens. So multi-channel has been around since the mid-1990s. But what's happened recently is that it's become, say, a first-class citizen. It's become house-trained, housebroken. So now you can do good OCR recognition on it. You can treat a document coming from a portal the same way you get to treat an email attachment, the same way you possibly can treat an e-fax and so on. And yes, it is going into a centralized capture operation because they're doing a lot of the error correction and QA and passing it over the fence into the downstream ECM system. You can see the rest of the capabilities there, e-signature, e-fax, mobile apps, and so on. This is doable. You have to be careful. It's not as new as centralized capture, and there's a whole hodgepodge of vendors out there and products out there, and so you have to be careful how you go. The second thing I guess we learned maybe from benchmarking operations is that before you do anything on the periphery, before you do anything with distributed, remote, multi-channel, blah, 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 you've got to make sure that your core is in great shape. Your centralized capture operation is in rock-solid shape, because otherwise you will very quickly get a kind of a mare's nest, a spider web. So what are some of the benefits? And oftentimes benefits, I just review what I just said in terms of capabilities. I'll try to say using different words. The benefit comes to both upstream and downstream. So you get support for multiple channels of ingestion. You get reduced complexity for users. They don't have a Batman tool belt of, well, I have to scan in off of my mobile device. I'm using this to do e-fax. I use this software to do MFP capture. I use this software, and so on. It's all unified from their perspective. You get improved data quality and reduced out-of-order submission. which your downstream customers are going to love. You get time savings for you, operations, and downstream for vetting. You get tighter visibility and controls into what's happening when. This has been a really big problem for folks, that with Frankenstein's monster of different systems and so on, it's very hard to get a unified view, either in real time or in quarterly, yearly, as to how the processing operation is going. It processes documents in a consistent manner, improving everything. It really raises our boat, improving everything from training to operations to disaster recovery and so on. And as part of that, fewer moving parts mean fewer potential break parts. Again, very excellent for robustness, reliability, for disaster recovery, and so on. So now let's move to the fourth piece, which is how to plan and manage your capture operation. So here's another one of those eye charts, but I'm going to go through it, don't worry. I said, so you've been thinking, I hope, about what opportunities you have for capture, whether it's, it might be administrative, cost centers like invoice processing or HR or customer service, or some of your lines of business, whether it's loan processing or manufacturing or prospecting or development in pharma. And you do some modeling as to whether it will be cost effective. With a lot of this stuff, you can do it, but just because you can do it doesn't mean it's going to be cost effective. So you've got to determine whether you're going to save money by automating a bunch of stuff, or actually hand keying and hand QA would be more efficient. And then you've got to have an efficient operation. So these are the things that we look at, and we've been doing it since '95. When we evaluate operations, it's a lot more than just the technology, as I mentioned. I also indicated that your operation can be in-house, it can be outsourced, or it can be a hybrid of the two. And we'll hear about hybrid operations in the second part of this talk. But the first thing we look at is we move from the core to the center, as it were. So we move from capture processes and technology out to operations, and out to QA, out to things like vendor management and business continuity and financial management. So as I'm walking out, think of, circles within circles, and I'm walking from the core out to the periphery. So the first thing we look at are primary processes. And so these are what you're all probably familiar with, the mailroom or wherever where you receive paper or whatever, the doc prep, scanning, fax, indexing, QA, and release, throwing it over the fence to the ECM system or whatever. And for each of these, I'm going to just mention some of the criteria that you should be evaluating yourself by, what some of the best-in-class operations are doing, and then typical challenges. And I bet that many of you have some of these challenges. So I mentioned the criteria. Best practices is folks, starting in the mailroom, they segregate work in groups for efficiency. And for level of treatment according to SLAs and service level agreements and so on. They're also able to automatically escalate work for exception handling. And a lot of the design of the processes is done well beforehand and is done by, customer managers and such, product managers in the capture operation, even if it's in-house, who work with the client and the in-house client and help them design the process. Not just so it's efficient for them, but also so it's efficient for you. Typical challenges that many of you folks probably have is doing a lot of manual doc prep, manual paper sorting, not using technology to reduce sorting complexity, but also having too many unique and complex processes. You grow up as a capture operation in your bank or your factory, whatever, and you take on multiple jobs, and they're all very different from each other. So you have now 5 very different processes. And as you continue to take on new jobs, you probably have not been doing a lot of consolidating, a lot of packaging. And so this is going to be a real problem. The biggest, maybe this is the third thing that I learned from benchmarking, the biggest fix that you can make, the single thing that you can change that helps everyone is consolidating, rationalizing, going down to as few capture systems as possible, as few processes as possible, and so on. And that raises all the other boats. So now I talked about primary processes. Let's look at the supporting processes. And I'm talking about here things like records management. So often your capture operation at the end of scanning these documents in has to then box up the documents and send them to Iron Mountain or an internal or back to the department or whatever. I'm talking about work scheduling, doing it in an automated fashion, customer service, how you deal with support and complaints and so on. And the best practices for these folks do automated routing based on the metadata, based on the index assignment to the documents. They do real-time reporting and exception monitoring. They do workload balancing based on volumes, not using a whiteboard. So they start out maybe using a whiteboard at the beginning of the week, but then it goes into being able to, in real time, move all hands on deck around to different capture stations and so on. So what do people who are challenged do? They typically have, they can only schedule the work manually. They use a lot of Microsoft Office tools to do a lot of their planning and operations work, QA, and so on. And I have in there poor product management discipline. So they don't have, you should work like a software firm or whatever, a well-managed service bureau, where you're coming out with a new version, major versions and minor versions and so on. And you're not led by the nose by your customers. And then primary technology capabilities. So these are the technologies that implement the primary processes. So, the most interesting ones are being able to do OCR, ICR, intelligent document recognition, be able to do distributed capture and indexing, be able to do mobile device capture, all various types of acquisition channels. Best practices, we can get a little quantitative here. At least 30 to 60% or more of your document volume is automatically indexed. You're providing distributed capture capabilities. You're doing intelligent forms redesign. The best folks do hook up with their output side of their organization, and so you're trying to address round-trip documents. That is, if you're sending forms and documents out to your customers, you've got control over this. You know who those forms are going to. So you can use a 2D barcode and encode a bunch of stuff about them. So when they come in, you can get the phenomenal OCR on those 2D barcodes rather than having to hand key enter or use problematic OCR. So what are the challenged folks doing? The poor use of available technology to provide efficiency, too many processes and ingestion technologies, lack of automated tools. Now, Novitex excluded, many folks, not many, one of the challenges with some service bureaus is they like the labor cost. They like the labor money that they get. And so they're disincented from using highfalutin new technology. So be sure to ask your BPO, your service bureau, what kind of technology they use, what kind of automation they use, and so on. So you're not paying for doc prep and hand indexing and hand QA and so on. So let's move on to supporting technology. I'm well aware of the time, so I know that I'm going to get to Hook shortly, so I'm managing that. So supporting technologies are things like how you do billing and online reporting, and how you integrate in a coupled manner with a downstream ECM system. So when you throw the documents over the fence into the ECM system, the document repository, the archive, whatever it is there kind of a handshake where you say, okay, I have 30 loan application packages, and each of them has 20 pages. And the ECM system says, yes, I received all those, or no, I did not, and so on. The best practices for this are, these are the technologies to support the supporting processes. So real-time reporting, queue and workload management, end-user online reporting. What many of your customers, whether it's internal or external, will want is some kind of visit, particularly if you're doing complex, expensive stuff, is the ability to see where their documents are at any point in time. At which point? Have they just hit the mailroom? Are they just being QA'd? Are they already in the system? And so on. But the ability to do this is not just good for you, it's good for QA, it's good for customer satisfaction. Operations. So here, looking at service level agreement conformance, whether you're hitting your numbers, how your utilization of your devices, whether if you've got 3 big scanners, are you using them all full time, or are 2 sitting idle because you have to build up for peak times, and then and non-peak times, 2 of them just sit there. Employee productivity, shifts and hours of operation, are you using 1 or 3 shifts, and the percentage of temporary labor. So best practices, again, I'll get quantitative. We find that the best mix, if you're doing it in-house, uses captive employees at 70%, temporary contract labor is 30% or more of the workforce. So you're hitting your staffing for averages, not for peak times and so on. And likewise, you're reviewing your equipment and your software and your staff quarterly at least to see how the utilization rates are in. So what are some of the typical challenges of you folks? Well, oftentimes, as I indicated, the equipment and the space and such is underutilized because you build for peaks. And because you've got a large number of complex, maybe unpredictable processes, customers, and so on, you've got some surprises, and you have to do same-day turnaround with a big spike. And so all hands have to move on deck and work that new load of documents that just came in. Almost done. We're over the hump. Quality mechanisms. Here we're looking at things like error tracking and whether you use statistical manual sampling. That is, are you actually sampling every single document, or because of your volumes, you can't do that, so you do it in a proactive, systematic way, and you're using a statistical method in order to determine what you should be sampling. Various kinds of feedback reporting to get the root cause analysis and so on, and so what caused the problem. Staff certifications, say with Six Sigma Black Belt quality reviews, and that's what the best practices folks do. They have automated tracking of quality statistics for each function. They're able to adeptly move from tracking 80% to 100% or 100% down to 92% and so on, depending on the needs of the moment. And I'll get into that with the next slide. The limited typical challenges are really a limited ability to systematically diagnose problems and bad feedback. That is the absence of feedback from your downstream customers. And because QA is one of those areas that we learned, you can't just crank it up incrementally and add more body. You have to do things differently. This is an area where you have to use automation and have to use smarter methods to do QA rather than just adding more eyeballs and bodies. And here's an example. This is it's a military sample. It's an example. So the problem that it addresses is the following. I don't want to sample every single document that goes through because I just can't do that. So how do I proactively, systematically take a subset of it to sample and to determine the QA? And how do I flexibly know when I have to be more rigorous or when I can relax a bit? And this is a table. It's just a table, but it tells you when you should become more rigorous, when you should become more relaxed, and so on. And it can be used for you as a selling tool to your customers. Look, we're going to be efficient because we're not going to sample everything, but we're going to do it in a proven way where we sample just a subset, and we can immediately ramp up if we have a new operator or whether we see just a tiny bit of more errors than usual. We know we have to become rigorous, and for how long we have to become rigorous. By the way, if you can want that table, I'd be happy to send it to you. Now, human resources, these are the people. So the things we look at are training. I'm laughing because this is probably more than you bargained for. You thought I'd just be talking gently about captioning. But for HR, we're talking about how well you do training, what kind of turnover and tenure there is, whether you're able to do variable compensation and incentive systems and so on, what kind of management you have. And the best practices for this are a bunch of cross-training as much as possible, and have piece rate incentives so that the more high quality, fast work folks do, the more money they get or other prizes if you can't give them money, and so on. So what are the typical challenges? Well, the inability to introduce incentive systems and inconsistent training because you've got 3 different flavors of scanners. You've got 4 locations. You're using 3 capture systems. Sometimes you're using an outsourcer. Sometimes you're not, and so on. And customer satisfaction. We are really almost done. So this is looking at your immediate internal downstream business unit customer satisfaction, but also IT satisfaction and the satisfaction of the audit, both internal audit and the regulatory bodies for HIPAA compliance and SEC Rule 17 compliance and so on. And the best practices are to really understand what makes your customers happy, actively solicit them through surveys and phone interviews, do sit-downs with them regularly, use tools like Net Promoter to see if they're really happy with you, and so on. And so the typical challenges are many of you folks probably don't have regularly scheduled customer surveys and then don't statistically analyze where the problems are and so on. As part of this is your marketing and sales efforts, right? And also your product management, learning what new capabilities are required and so on. Financial management is how you cost price your own jobs and then how you bill back or at least notify your customers the hard work you're doing and how much it's costing you. So this is where we look for application and service level pricing. We look at reinvestment levels. If you're pushing the savings or whatever, your revenue back into research and development, back into better service and so on. Best practices are to do a process design before you implement and really educate your customers and shape what they want. And then challenges are often great financial analysis and so on requires too many hours, tools, and so on, manual tools and such. Vendor management is, and these are the last two, is to really centralize the relationship with your vendors, really get in their grills, make them accountable, get with the reference sites and see what they're doing, other folks who are using the vendors, form an aggregate so that you're requesting things together and not just as a single disgruntled customer and so on. And finally, business continuity, disaster recovery, and this is multiple sites are good. Having hot swap areas is great. The thing that raises the most votes, as I've said 2 times already, is to really consolidate and simplify your systems where you can, so you can move from one location to another. If you're interested in any of the stuff I've talked about, just let me know, email me, call me, and I'll talk about your capture operation. We can talk for half an hour, and we can also talk about if you want to do a full-blown maturity assessment, some gap analysis, a benchmark, and so on. Thank you very much, and I'll pass the talking stick over to Pete.
Well, thank you very much, Rich, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Appreciate everybody attending. I'm going to go ahead and start clicking through our slides here. Okay, Teresa, you may have to move to the next slide. Oops, we went a little far. Just a moment. There we go. Okay. Again, my name is Pete Stein. I'm with Novitex. Just a brief statement about Novitex. We are a document management service provider, and we focus on business process outsourcing. So the topics that Rich covered this morning earlier are very apropos to what I will be going through in terms of giving you a view of what we see in the marketplace and the trends that we're drawing from our customer base. And just as a quick backdrop to our customer base, our primary geographic area is North America. We service 7 vertical markets: healthcare, financial, tech, energy, consumer, government, and legal. And our typical customer base are Fortune 500 companies. So a lot of this information today is drawn from conversations with our clients and behaviors that we see. So if I start out with what we're seeing in terms of digital versus paper and capture volume by format, what we're seeing right now is we still see a level of 60% or so of paper capture. So electronic is representing about 30%, and fax is about 10% on the capture end. Fax is dropping faster than the other two. Electronic is starting to supplant paper, but currently these are the percentages we are seeing in terms of capture. And we also see that there is a shift away from legacy systems and processes, but it takes a strong management initiative and directive to help keep this migration going. And there are a number of clients that ask us frequently what we need to do to push along the migration from paper to digital. And it really has to start, from our view, at an executive level where there's support for these processes. So it's a very strong statement that we need to get that executive backing to move some of this work from paper to digital. And it's part of the culture of many organizations. If I go to the next slide, here are some of the trends and reasons we see for going digital. And Rich has covered some of these, but I'm going to go back through these. And most importantly, a topic that Rich did bring up that overrides everything here. The goal is to unify and create efficient processes versus ad hoc. And technology will help that cause. We believe in utilizing technology, not labor, to get to this digital environment. That is what we lead with, and that's where we think the industry really is driving to. So if we look at the reasons to go digital, the first point is search and share documents. Especially when documents are indexed, it's easy to search them. It's easy to draw information quickly versus passing around, obviously, physical documents. So this is a very strong proponent of going digital. Second point is faster retrieval time and response time. You know, certainly moving digital documents is a lot easier and faster than moving paper-based. The third is something that's come to play very heavily in the past year and a half, and that's security and compliance, along with reducing physical space. They all go hand in hand. When we see clients that store paper documents on their floor or they're in non-secure areas, we see that as a security risk. And oftentimes, again, that's the tie, is you have a physical space situation along with a security risk that goes with that, coupled with the fact that they need to retrieve those records often, and it can become a compliance factor. So when we look and discuss going digital with clients, we often look originally at their real estate space and the physical records they have on hand, and we help to try and steer them to a digital environment which will improve both their security and compliance requirements. The areas that still have a paper-based, I would say, advantage, okay, and I'm going to say this carefully, is when you have large backfile projects that clients will often ask us to take a look at and say, we really want to digitize these records. We really want to move these records into a digital environment with a indexing repository. The questions that we like to start out with is, how often are those records retrieved? How often are they used? If you have records that are not being retrieved and they're being stored and not being drawn upon, oftentimes those records can sit in warehouses and not be really drawn from. We take a look at that and we try to determine an ROI based on retrieval and based on frequency of use, compliance, and then, of course, security. So there are a number of different factors to look at for backfile. But the key point is to focus on high-value, high-touch documents. Those documents that you're drawing from and requiring often are the ones you want to digitize. The documents that don't require as much high touch, the answer to whether you digitize or not can be built around compliance and security more than drawing and touching those documents. Moving into a little bit different area, we at Novitex do set up and stand up clients in both a shared environment for a cloud network and also private cloud environments. We're seeing a greater adoption rate here, and it's accelerating. If I look at 2015, right now we're running around 12% of our clients. We expect it to grow to 20% in 2016 and approximately 25%. It could go as high as 30% in 2017. There's a greater understanding of the value and security around cloud-based environments. There's still some skepticism, but where we're seeing real advantages, especially with the new encryption methodologies, is to continue to promote and support a cloud-based environment for our clients, again, whether it's provisioned or it's a private structure. Okay. Just waiting for our next slide to come up.
There we go. Okay, so one of the topics that's come up often in the past, I would say 6 months, has been a question about mobile capture and content access. And as Rich had mentioned, a methodology for mobile capture improves your capture time, and also at the same time, per Rich, it can be said that it can improve the structure of your digital environment, the network. So when we look at mobile capture and content access, we see a couple things. We see a high degree of recognition of value, but we still see low levels of planning and activity by our clients. They recognize the value, but there's not a lot of activity around supporting it and making it a reality. There's still a fair amount of concerns around privacy and security concerns, and these are large factors in slowing adoption. So in terms of what we see with this area, we see this accelerating, but it still has a migration path to go, and it's still going to take time to really see a ramp up where there's a solid direction behind mobile. So is everybody still there? I assume they are. So if we move to the next slide, Teresa, we're going to be discussing scanning and indexing.
Off-site in a near-site location to our clients' requirements, and there's a hybrid model. So all three of those we deploy. What we're seeing right now is a current growth trend toward hybrid, and the effects of hybrid that we see that advantage our clients is a balance of costs and compliance support. And what I mean by that is we have a balance of costs where we are using our labor, which is shared labor, in our locations, and this is allowing us to flex our labor so we don't build to peaks. We manage to peaks. And we also have a strong compliance report with our security requirements around our centers and also our cloud network. The other sites that we talk about today, or that we utilize, is off-site and near-site. And again, a near-site has a cost containment component to it and security. But in the case of the off-site and near-site, that's doing all the scan and indexing in those centers. But they do provide a high level of cost containment and security similar to the hybrid. And the third is what we'll call on-site. The on-site environment today, we do have a lot of on-sites. The challenge with on-sites is we have to staff labor specific to the client requirements. So that labor takes up space and is also dedicated, and oftentimes, as is true with our clients who build their own solutions or support their own digitization, we have to plan often for peaks. So it tends to be the least cost-effective, but it's also very high on the level of compliance where clients do not want to have their records leave their facility. So it covers both ends. But if I flip back to the hybrid model, what we like about the hybrid model is we can scan on site. This gives our clients the security of compliance, record compliance, and maintaining the records on site, and then we'll index off site through a cloud network or through a VPN or FPN connection. So in all cases, we see advantages based on specific client requirements to each, but the growth trend tends to be toward the hybrid model because we believe that it offers the best combination of cost containment and compliance and security. Okay, so moving to the next slide. today we assembled a case study for you, and this is what I wanted to talk about with this particular case study is this particular client is a healthcare provider for managed care plans for approximately 4 million members. And we do a lot of work with healthcare providers. But the challenge that this client has been facing is been a problem where they have had to manage these processes manually. And they've had to employ a large number of staff and FTEs that they have utilized at their locations to manage this process. They did reach out to a consultant vendor to evaluate this, but at the end of the day, they determined that they could not manage it alone. In terms of our position with this, we took a look at this and we determined immediately that we could not only improve the cycle time, but we could also reduce costs through the reduction of labor and applying new technology where they were utilizing disparate and old technology. So there were 4 basic components that we looked at with this client to help them achieve the goals of improved cycle time and reduce costs. The first was that we introduced email automation where they were printing and scanning and rescanning emails. This cut out a lot of additional cycle time and reduced FTE headcount and helped them move their product a lot faster and became a more responsive organization. The second is we were able to provide them with a tracking system so that there would be accountability to mail items coming in, and this was something they did not have, so we were able to ensure receipt and improve processing efficiencies. The third area we introduced is we built a private cloud-based scanning model for them, which allows us to scale up and down as volumes drive processing. And in this hybrid model where we're scanning on-site and indexing off-site, we have great flexibility to manage to high levels of peak demand during enrollment periods and also to manage lower levels and flex both the workforce and our ability to control throughput to the highest level. And the fourth is that we gave them a full end-to-end reporting capability assessment and accessibility. This is something they did not have. So they can view the process on a real-time basis every day, where their forms are, what the process is, what stage they're in. So they're always up to date. It's something they did not have when they had a disparate set of workflow structures in their digital network. So all told, for this particular client, we've been able to reduce the headcount currently by 30%. We think we can reduce it further as we deploy more automation tools. And we've also improved the processing time 4x. So we've been able to achieve 2 different things for them, reduce costs and also to improve cycle time. So with that, that will wrap up my section. And Teresa, I am going to turn it back over to you. And I thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Oh, thank you. We've just been listening to Pete Stein of Novitex and Richard Medina of DocuLabs, and just leaving Novitex's contact information up on the screen for you for just a brief moment there. And also just wanted to remind you that this webinar is being recorded, and please also continue to send your questions in. And I'm going to jump right into some of the Q&A right now. And one of the questions that came in, it was a little bit on what Rich had talked briefly about the wet ink signatures and what he had mentioned in his presentation. I just want to let you guys know that AIIM has done several webinars, and there are also some white papers and some research work that we've done on the topic. So I just want to point you over to the AIIM website, and if you within the AIIM site, if you actually search on the term digital signature, you'll come to a wealth of resources that we have there that explains the business case, help you make the case, just more stats and information, and a whole lot more detail there for you. So just wanted to point that resource out to you and just let you know you have that there available to you. One of the other questions, or another question that has come in here, Rich, I want to start with you on this one, and it's talking more about from the change management perspective. A lot of what we're talking about today is, capturing information and someone is just looking for how to deal with the culture of changing people from viewing hard copy documents or the need to print off and rescan versus viewing electronic only. Can you talk a little bit about some tips or methodologies to help companies make that cultural shift?
Right. So a big concern over the last 15 years, more, has been what about how do you get folks to make this cultural shift? And the cliched answer is always hire children. But a more reasonable answer is that if we actually survey our clients, and what we often find, and we particularly do this when we see a more mature industry, whether it's timber, literally timber, or paper, or areas of government and areas of insurance and so on. And we do a survey for them to say, well, okay, so how are you using wireless? How are you using digital in your own lives? And we find we're bowled over, actually, not so much anymore because we're used to it, but by the fact that folks who actually at work are just inundated with paper and seem to be very comfortable with paper, at home are using Facebook and LinkedIn and also Twitter and all sorts of these electronic media, social media, and so on. And so sometimes it's everyone was ignorant and change will be easy. And then sometimes it's a matter of, look, you're doing this in your own lives. Let's bring that innovation into the workplace. And they often become the ones who are clamoring for it. But you've got to address that. And the reason for that is recidivism. That is, just to bring it back to the topic of the presentation, many ambitious imaging initiatives failed because legal and business executive team and managers did not stress enough that no, the copy of record, the working copy is the digital copy. It's not a screenshot. It's not a paper document, and so on. So then the workers would slide back into the old ways, the paper ways, even more inefficient than the original ways because now they're working with screenshots and they're putting stuff on on the hard drives and so on. So you've got to help make that transition. It's absolutely essential. I can take, I'm sorry, I can make two of those I can really quickly address in one breath, e-signatures and such. I would say that question, sure. Very good. I did two of those presentations on e-signatures, and some of the things that we talk about are just kind of like a decision tree. So look at your own in-house operation, and you ask, legal, is it a regulation, is it a regulatory requirement that we be wet signature or not? If it's not, then it's a different discussion. It's cultural. Is it a record, even if it's not a regulation, do the courts that are relevant to us, do they hold that typically that the record copy is paper and that's favored more than electronic, so it'd be detrimental to us if we were using electronic. If that's not the case, then it's cultural. What about peers? So look at your peer organizations. Have they all moved on and are using ambitiously electronic signatures, or are they all laggards like ourselves? And then fourth, look to where we're starting to do it in our own organization. And it may be and we may be doing it well. If we're doing it problematically, well, that's something to fix. But if we're doing it well, see, no one got hurt, and so on. But the assumption, so those are four areas that you look at when you're making your case. The fifth area is something that you have to make sure is in really good order, and that is that for electronic signatures to work, you've got to have, your records management operation has to be good enough. Your e-discovery has to be good enough. Your processes for those operations has to be good enough so it'll be advantageous to use electronic signatures. And then the buckets, the repositories that you're putting the e-signature documents in or whatever, they have to be in good shape. But of all that, it's often just cultural, and you can sway them with those four arguments that I just gave, combination of them.
Okay. Pete, back to the question that we were having, talking about cultural shifts with getting people to, keep the documents digital and keep it so that it can facilitate better workflows and better processes. What have you been seeing in your own customer base and how your customers have been struggling and dealing with that issue?
And it ties into a large degree with what Rich was talking about, and a comment I made earlier is, in order to support thoroughly through an organization digitization, it tends to often flow into company cultural aspects. And when a company is thinking digital and has support from the executive level on down or the C-level down, it flows a lot easier. I think that change is difficult, as we know, for a lot of companies and for people, and change takes a lot of momentum, and you have to have the backing. And if the executive or C-level group at an organization is not supporting or does not have a desire to move things digital, we find that it slows the process extensively. Even if there are key stakeholders that want to support it, there still has to be a momentum from above to keep the momentum going. Also, the other side of it is to look at when we look at helping clients consider going digital, we try to build it around a couple different aspects. One is an ROI. You know, why would you go digital? Okay, what does it do for your organization in terms of cost? And what does it do in terms of speed and accessibility? And also, what does it do in terms of security? And those are the places that we try to help the key stakeholders in influencing their senior management on how to move forward in terms of going digital. But the direction at the end of the day is to create the justification through those three aspects I mentioned, and then to get senior management support.
Thanks. There's one more question that I want to squeeze in here, and Rich, just want to get your quick thoughts on this. For the people whose customers, or like if they're patients, if it's in the medical field or something like that, if they don't have access to computers, digital work, and even this question is specific to the medical community, where they have to print out patient discharge instructions, special information. Any suggestions on how to reduce that volume of still outputting?
What often works in heavily regulated industries and so on, or whether it's leakage, information leakage, is was it swipe to print? So you can control what gets printed. So you can control what gets printed through software controls, but you also can control how it gets printed. So you have your ID card, and your ID card, you have to actually swipe it at the printer where the documents are going to be printed, and that has virtually eliminated a lot of the left documents, medical records, and so on, that are strays that are hanging out on printers and on the floor near the printer, and so on. That's if you have no access to that assumes that you have the ability to print, but just you're going somewhere that you won't have access to a tablet or something, and you've got to carry the paper around. But that's been the most effective innovation that we've seen recently.
Okay. Well, we're getting close to the end of our webinar hour, and I just wanted to remind our audience just to please give us your feedback. If there's a link to a survey in the resources tab towards the bottom of your screen there, I personally greatly value that feedback, and I read through everything after every single webinar. So please feel free to put your comments in there, and also to suggest other topics for us to cover. Very much want to thank our sponsor, Novitex, for sponsoring our webinar today. Without the support from our solution providers, AIM wouldn't be able to provide you with these free educational programs like our webinar. So just thank you, Novitex, for all of the support and the help that you've provided even with the content of today's webinar. We do have more webinars coming up on our calendar. If you go to our website, you can see the next one next week is on more information with managing your documents, and then also, as I had mentioned, with the webinars on demand and the library that we have, there's a link there as well. And just as we come to the end, I do want to ask each of our speakers for their closing thought or a key takeaway from everything that we've talked about today. And I'd like to begin first with Richard Medina of DocuLabs. Your closing thought today.
I would say that I guess it's a bit of a caution, and that is, well, no, I'll do it this way. This will be happy. Yes, so the trend is to go on the periphery and to decentralize with mobile and mobile devices and MFPs and so on, and with electronic documents and so on. So you're having lots of people on the periphery of your organization capturing information and getting into the business process. The lesson we've learned is that you absolutely positively have to bring this into a central location to get it vetted, to get it QA'd, to get it normalized, and so on. And so there still is a lot of work that your centralized capture operation can do. Its job description has just changed slightly. It's now maybe more important than it was before.
Thanks. And Pete Stein of Novitex, your closing thoughts today.
Sure. And I'll echo a little bit of what Richard said and expand on it is the most important thing that I would say to take a look at is as you're reviewing your digital and your document management processes, you want to lay a solid foundation at the beginning. And that means that you want to take, again, if you have disparate workflows, and organize them in a way that you can build a unified structure. And once you've taken a look at that or work with a partner to help you get there, you want to take that structure and you want to build, again, a solid foundation for the future. The greatest challenge that can happen is to build an ad hoc or a temporary solution and then have to redo it a year or two later. So you want to take a look at not only your current state, but where you're going to be in 3, 4, or 5 years. And if you can get that far out and look at what you're trying to do, it will save you money and time and a lot of aggravation if you can build the right foundation to get there. And then you can add the pieces to it. So that would be my advice.
Thank you, Pete. That's all we have time for today. Again, many thanks to our speakers, Rich Medina of DocuLabs, Pete Stein of Novitex, and very much thank you to our sponsor, Novitex. For AIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we will see you next time, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.